Under the hush of winter, when dawn rose pale as old parchment, Marshal Rowan Hale walked the frost-lined main road with the only companions who never judged him: Sage and Bran. Snow muffled the world into a silence so complete it felt sacred, as if the earth itself were listening. The two dogs padded alongside him with the steadiness of creatures who understood more than they could ever say. Sage, the elder, carried the calm dignity of an old philosopher. Bran, younger and eager, walked with restless warmth, eyes constantly scanning the quiet. Rowan moved somewhere between them, worn but not broken, humbled but still trying to be worthy of the badge pinned to his coat. The townsfolk had already begun stirring behind frosted windows, though none stepped outside. Rowan felt their eyes on him, soft with pity or edged with doubt. The memory of last year's failure still clung to him like a second winter the boy he hadn't reached in time. The mother's voice cracking in the churchyard snow, no matter how quietly Rowan walked. That memory followed with louder steps. He lowered a hand to Sage's head and found solace in the familiar weight beneath his palm. Sage leaned into the touch, a silent reassurance. Bran, catching the moment, wagged once, hopeful, as though trying to lift the heaviness from Rowan's shoulders. The quiet morning fractured with a single, distant sound, whimper thin as brittle glass. Both dogs froze. Bran's tails stiffened. Sage's ears tilted forward with the solemn alertness of a creature who knew suffering when it spoke. Rowan held still, breath suspended. The sound came again, barely there, carried on the cold like a plea to weak to travel far. The dogs reacted first. Sage moved with a purposeful stride toward the tree line, Bran breaking into an eager trot ahead of him. Rowan followed, driven by instinct and dread, his boots sinking into the deepening snow. The world narrowed to the dog's tracks, the muffled heartbeat of winter, and that fragile, intermittent cry. The pines grew dense around them, their heavy branches bending under snow. Rowan felt the forest press close, as if urging him forward. The sound sharpened into something unmistakably. Child's trembling attempt to breathe through fear. Then he saw. Her, Lydia Frost, though he didn't know her name yet, sat bound to a fallen log. Her small frame swallowed by winter. Rope chafed her wrists. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks in frozen strands. She looked like she had been placed there by someone who feared what she might say if allowed to run. Her lips were blue, her shivers faint, her breath a thin ghost slipping into the cold. Bran reached her first, whining as he nosed her bound hands. Sage pressed himself against her side, offering warmth without hesitation. Lydia's eyelids fluttered, heavy with exhaustion. But she leaned toward them instinctively, like someone who had never been comforted so gently. Rowan fell to his knees, the sight of her knocking the wind from him. His hand shook as he cut the rope, not from cold, but from the echo of his own remembered failure. When she slumped into his arms, her head rested against his chest with painful trust. He wrapped his coat around her, gathering her against him as if she were something breakable, and she was. Her voice was almost lost in the winter air. She said, "Nobody would come for me." Rowan swallowed the burn rising in his throat. "Well," he whispered, tightening his hold, "she was wrong." He carried her back toward town, Sage walking close to his left, Bran guarding his right. Each step felt heavy with meaning, as if the forest itself exhaled a sigh of relief. Lydia's breathing steadied, but her trembling didn't stop. Rowan could only hope the warmth of his coat and the loyalty of the two dogs would coax her back from whatever dark edges she'd been pushed toward. Word of the rescue reached town before Rowan did. Curtains shifted as he passed through the main road. Lydia's presence, a small girl wrapped in his coat's parked murmurs that drifted like sparks on cold wind. Silas Creed stood on the saloon porch, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Convenient timing, Marshal," he muttered loud enough for nearby ears. After a whole year of coming up empty, Rowan didn't rise to the bait. He rarely did. The only response came from Sage, who stopped just long enough to stare at Silas. With a calm intensity that made the man shift uncomfortably, Rowan brought Lydia to his home beside the marshal's office, a place that smelled faintly of pine resin and saddle oil. Warmed by a stove that was always burning, but never enough to erase the chill of memory, he laid her on the small cot near the fire and covered her with blankets. Sage settled at her feet. Bran curled himself close to her side, his head resting near her arm. Lydia's trembling eased only when she felt the steady breathing of the dogs around her, when Evelyn Marewood arrived quiet. Composed, carrying a pouch of winter herbs, she took in the scene with a softness that warmed the space more than the fire. She brushed a strand of hair from Lydia's forehead, her touch confident yet tender. Rowan watched her from across the room, struck by how her presence made the world seem less brittle. "She's been frightened for a long time," Evelyn murmured. "Fear leaves shadows deeper than frostbite." Rowan nodded, though he felt the words scrape against his own history. "Can you help her sleep?" Evelyn crushed leaves, brewed a small clay cup of steam-swirled tea, and held it to Lydia's lips. The girl obeyed with the trust of someone too weary to resist. Evelyn's eyes met Rowan's over the rim of the cup. Something unspoken settled between them, shared understanding of quiet wounds. But the town's whispers grew louder as night fell. Some claimed the girl was cursed, bringing winter misfortune with her. Others declared Rowan had found her too easily, suggesting he might have staged the rescue for forgiveness he didn't deserve. Silas's voice carried particularly far that evening, dripping suspicion like melted ice. Lydia startled at every raised voice outside, shrinking deeper under the blanket. Sage responded by placing his head on her knee, a gentle weight that steadied her trembling. Bran nudged her hand, urging her to pet him. She did, fingers barely touching his fur. But the small contact softened her breathing when she finally spoke again. It was in pieces fragments that slipped from her lips like broken leaves. "A cabin." A woman's voice. "Braided hair." A phrase that chilled Rowan to the bone. "Make them miss you."
Eyes
Shifted to the window, to the dark pines beyond. And she whispered almost imperceptibly. "She said they'd look for me only when I was gone." Rowan felt the room tilt with that revelation. Sage rose to his feet, staring out the window with alert stillness. Bran's ears twitched, sensing something beyond the walls. Rowan stepped closer to Lydia, who said that. But she shook her head, biting her lip until it whitened. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, and Sage pressed close again, absorbing her fear with quiet loyalty. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the shutters. Rowan felt something shift in, unseen presence lingering at the edges of the forest, watching, waiting. His instincts murmured that the girl's rescuer might not be the only one searching tonight. As the fire crackled low, Lydia drifted into sleep between the two dogs, their warm bodies anchoring her to safety. Rowan stood by the window, looking out at the endless stretch of white where truth still hid. The weight of the day pressed against him, but beneath it all, a small spark, fragile, flickering, began to glow. He wasn't alone in this search, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't fail this time. That fragile spark, however, came with a whisper of foreboding. Somewhere in the winter-dark pines, something stirred. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something human. Something waiting. And Rowan knew the quiet of the night was about to break again. Sage was the first to rise, long before the sun. The old dog lifted his head from Lydia's feet and stared toward the shuttered window, his ears tuned to something beyond the human world's reach. Bran followed, posture tense, tail low, but not afraid alert. Rowan noticed the shift instantly. He had learned to trust the dog's instincts more than his own haunted reasoning. The room, warm with firelight and the soft breath of the sleeping child, suddenly felt fragile, as if safety were a thin shell that could crack with one careless touch. The trail had not ended yesterday. Whoever had left Lydia in the snow had not wandered far. Rowan laced his boots with movements sharpened by purpose. The quiet fear in Lydia's sleep-twisted expression urged him forward. He slipped his coat on, and Sage nudged his knee. Ready. Bran paced at the door, glancing back toward the girl, as if reassuring himself she was still there. "I'll find whoever did this," Rowan whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Lydia stirred, but did not wake. By the time he stepped outside, dawn was only a pale suggestion. Snow drifted silently, falling in slow spirals that made the world look blurred at the edges like a half-remembered dream. Sage lowered his head and began following a scent Rowan couldn't detect. Bran moved beside him, a shadow of determination at his side. The forest welcomed them with a cold that tasted metallic, as though the air itself remembered old hurts. Rowan followed the dogs up a narrow trail toward the western ridge. Each step carried the weight of whispered dread Lydia's fractured memories. It's the phrase she clung to with trembling breath. Make them miss you. Whoever had tied her up hadn't intended abandonment. They had intended a lesson shaped by cruelty. The tracks became clearer near the ridge boot prints. Staggered, erratic, half covered by wind-blown snow. Sage sniffed them, then growled low, a rumble forged from certainty. Rowan placed his hand gently on the dog's back. Good. Keep going. The trail led to a cluster of abandoned mining cabins, their roofs sagging under decades of storms. Rowan's breath tightened. Within the first cabin, dust and cold swallowed the air. But the second cabin stopped him in his tracks. Bundles of children's ribbons lay neatly beside a broken rocking chair. Wax dripped down the walls in hardened streams, pale as bone. A hat, small enough for a child, rested beside a stack of brittle drawings. A breath escaped Rowan, not fear, but recognition of a grief so warped it turned inward and lashed outward. Mara Thorne. He'd heard the whispers years back, a woman whose daughter wandered into a blizzard and never returned. The townsfolk had labeled her unstable, but no one had imagined she'd twist her sorrow into something so dangerous. Sage's body stiffened. Bran wind, ears pinned. Rowan knew what that meant before the thought fully formed. Lydia wasn't safe in town. He ran snow, flying under his boots. Breath stinging his lungs while Sage and Bran surged ahead with a speed born of desperation. The world blurred into streaks of white branches slashing the rising light. Each second a needle pressing against Rowan's ribs. When he reached his home, the door wasn't broken. It was simply ajar, gently pushed open by the wind or a careful hand. Lydia's blanket lay on the floor, still warm. A single footprint marked the snow just outside, small, quick, and dragging at the heel. Mara had come silently like a winter storm that hides its voice until it's too late. Bran howled once, a sound that carved the morning open. They tracked Lydia through the woods, her footprints weaving in frightened patterns. Sage led with unwavering certainty, stopping occasionally to lift his head to the wind. Ears tuned to something just beyond the reach of Rowan's senses. The sky turned a muted silver as they climbed the ridge, the cold deepening with each step. Rowan's thoughts pulsed with an old terror. He had failed once, lost a child once. He could not endure that ache again. Evelyn's steady gaze from last night flickered in his mind her trust, her belief in his quiet strength. He clung to it like a rope thrown across a chasm. When the ridge opened to the cliffside, Rowan saw them. Lydia stood near the edge, bound again, her hair whipping across her face in the rising wind. Mara Thorne knelt beside her, speaking in hurried whispers, words Rowan could not hear but recognized in essence. A plea for the world to hurt as she had hurt. A warped mother's love that became a cage. Rowan stepped forward slowly, palms open. Mara, she flinched. Her eyes were wild, shimmering with grief that had festered too long without being held. They forgot my girl, she whispered. No one searched long enough. No one cared until she was gone. Mara, Rowan said, voice low, steady as falling snow. I care about this child. Let me help you. Can't, she breathed. But they'll remember her. They'll remember me if she disappears too. Lydia shook, her eyes fixed on Rowan, then Sage, then Bran. Her lips parted in a silent plea. Rowan's heartbeat thundered, but his voice remained calm. Losing your child should have brought others to you. You deserved comfort, Mara, not emptiness. But this won't give you back what you lost. It will only make the world smaller, colder. Mara's grip on Lydia's arm loosened just slightly, but enough. Sage made the smallest sound, a soft bark barely louder than a sigh. It was his signal, subtle but sure. Bran lunged out wildly, not to attack, but to disrupt the moment. His movement startled Mara just enough for her to stumble backward. Lydia tipped, her boots sliding on the icy edge, and Sage leaped with a strength Rowan had never seen in him. His teeth caught Lydia's coat, pulling her away from the cliff as Bran pressed his body against hers to anchor her. Rowan rushed forward, grabbing Lydia and lifting her into his arms before she could fall again. Mara collapsed where she stood, sobbing into her hands, a shattered echo of the mother she once had been. Rowan cuffed her gently, not with anger, but with the solemnity of someone who understood the shape of grief carved by winter. When he carried Lydia back through the pines, Sage limped slightly from the effort, but his head stayed high. Bran nudged Lydia's hand, coaxing her to look at him instead of the shadows behind them. Her fingers curled into his fur, a small anchor in a world that had tried to take her twice. The town met them with stunned silence. For once, Silas Creed had nothing to say. People watched Lydia clinging to Rowan's coat, Sage walking proud despite his ache, Bran's gentle insistence that she'd stay warm by leaning into him. Evelyn stepped forward, her breath catching when she saw Rowan. And in that slow, lingering moment, something warm and unspoken passed between them, a recognition. A gratitude, a beginning carved from winter's hardest stone. That night, with Lydia sleeping safely between her two guardians, El Juan stood outside beneath a sky washed clean by snowfall. Every star above him shimmered like a memory restored, like something lost that finally found its way home. In the quiet, he felt the truth settle into him. Some rescues happen loudly, with heroics and fire. Others happen in silence, in the loyal heartbeat of a dog, in the trembling hand of a child, in the gentle courage of choosing not to run from grief, but to walk straight through it. And if you found something warm in this winter tale, some courage, some comforts, stay with Whispered Tales. There are more stories waiting in the quiet. Subscribe, and let us keep walking through the snow together.